Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It means a lot to be in this space of healing and important discussions on how we move forward together. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land we gather on is the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples have inhabited and cared for this land and continue to do so today. We have the honor to be joining you in the path of healing here today and every day. I'm so honored to be joining you on the second National Indigenous Mental Wellness Summit. And it's also wonderful to see my colleague, the Honorable Patty Hajdu, and also to thank Grandmother Marilyn Chevrier for opening this session truly in a good way. It allows us to open our hearts collectively in a prayer of healing and love to those who are suffering and have suffered, and to know that they need to be seen and embraced by all of us. Thank you as well to all of the leaders and delegates joining us over the course of the summit. Our conversations will be really, really important. As the new Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, I am grateful to have the opportunity to meet with each of you and to hear from you on the work related to mental health and substance use support for our First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I'd like to also acknowledge the immense wealth of expertise in this room here today. We have so much to learn from you, and Indigenous mental wellness practices across the full continuum of care, whether it's the medicine wheel, land-based approaches, sweat lodges, treatment, and so many more pathways to healing. More than ever, we need to do this work together because we must work with intention, because people are struggling across the country. As many of you know, Canada is facing an unrelenting and tragic toxic drug and overdose crisis, and no community has been left untouched. The impacts are seen and felt amongst our friends, our families, and our neighbors. And for those who use substances, their families and the communities around them need us to use every tool at our disposal to provide compassionate and loving care. To truly help people who use substances, we must provide them with a full range of services and supports that they can access along their wellness journey, when they need them and how they need them. Our government is focused on saving lives and connecting people to evidence-based services, including treatment and recovery, as well as wraparound supports like housing, probably the most important one. When one is safe, one can heal. Since assuming the role of Minister of Mental Health and Addictions this past July, I've heard from many across the country about the impact that mental health and substance use issues are having in their daily lives. I've also been struck by the dedication and innovation of community organizations and leaders in helping individuals facing these challenges. Their work is compassionate, it is relentless, it is tireless, and it is loving. We need this support because we truly could not do this work without you. Every person who uses substances is on their own path with unique needs, and their path isn't a linear one. And for anyone who knows someone who is struggling, particularly amongst populations who experience systemic racism and discrimination when accessing health services, we must do more. We know Indigenous populations are at a higher risk of experiencing mental health challenges and are disproportionately impacted by the overdose crisis. We see them, we need to help them. The root causes of it range from intergenerational trauma and the historical and ongoing effects of colonization, the impacts of the residential school system on First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities, and the consequences of climate change, as well as the social determinants of health, such as early childhood trauma, poverty, and lack of access to stable housing impacting them. The situation is worse amongst our Indigenous youth, with many continuing to struggle. Our Indigenous youth are also facing higher rates of suicide across the country. It's clear that we have to do more for them. Mental health support and care needs to be available in a child's early life, because when we nurture our children and intervene with love, guidance, and support, they can truly get the best start in life. And that's the work that we are doing together to save the lives of our children. I know that my colleague, Minister Hajdu, is seized with these issues as much as I am. We are supporting distinction-based approaches to mental health and wellness, including culturally appropriate services for addictions, trauma, suicide prevention, and life promotion, and the building of treatment centers, designed and guided by all of you. This means greater access to the full continuum of mental health and substance use services through evidence-based, person-centered, trauma-informed, and culturally safe approaches that are built by communities because your communities know what's needed most. These are many of the considerations that we put into improving the healthcare in Canada, including our mental health services, particularly for our First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. In February of 2023, we announced a historic investment of close to $200 billion over 10 years to provinces and territories. Of this, $25 billion will flow to provinces and territories through tailored bilateral agreements specifically for mental health. They will support the progress on 4 shared priorities to improve access to health services, family health teams, health workforces, modernizing the health system, and mental health and substance use services, of which so much more is needed. This funding is aimed at improving access for residents of all jurisdictions, including Indigenous peoples. We are currently working with provinces and territories to finalize the bilateral agreements, including ensuring that Indigenous organizations are meaningfully engaged in the process. No one should be left behind. In addition to the broad health system investments, Indigenous Services Canada is putting in place a number of initiatives to support Indigenous mental health, including the Hope for Wellness Helpline, the implementation of the National Inuit Suicide Prevention Strategy, the National Aboriginal Youth Suicide Prevention Strategy, and the Youth Hope Fund. These initiatives are concrete steps towards implementing the principles and rights set out in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. With all of these lists of important services for communities, I will be honest in saying, and humbly, that we know more work needs to be done. But I know that together, we have the best chance of addressing the ongoing crises that our youth and communities are seeing, both in their mental health and wellness and also in terms of the overdose crisis. If we are going to promote, nurture, strengthen, and sustain mental wellness, including addressing the issues of substance abuse for your communities and our communities, we must do it together in collaboration, partnership, listening, and healing. It's truly an honor to be here to listen and learn from all of you today. Thank you. Miigwech. Gee miigwech.
Thank you so much for providing opening remarks, and a couple of things that really caught my ear was a lot of funding and a lot of partnership with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. So we'll look forward to what that looks like. So now I would like to introduce the Honorable Patty Hajdu, who is the Minister of Indigenous Services and Minister responsible for the Federal Economic Development Agency of Northern Ontario, to provide some other opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Kara, and to Eagle Blackbird, thank you very much, both of you, for agreeing to MC the event. This is no small task, so I appreciate both of you being here. It's a pleasure to be here with you on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. And as I say that, you all know, most of you in the room, what that actually means. It means people were forcibly removed from this land. They were ripped away from the things that kept them healthy, the things that kept them connected. They were ripped away from each other, and families suffered tremendously. So let's be really clear when we do these land acknowledgements exactly what they mean. I can't stand up here anymore and do a land acknowledgement without actually saying to usually Western audiences what that means. And so I think that's the place to start, because this is about healing from all that has happened since those days. It's nice to see President Obed. Nice to see you. Although I am the government, weirdly, as the Crown Minister, I count on Natan as being one of my advisors who gives me solace sometimes in this very difficult work of trying to figure out how to decolonize or how to change the relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples to be somewhat more reflective, I think, of ancestors that signed treaties or that met and made agreements in various parts of the country. Yeah, exactly. There is hope. I'm hopeful that we'll get there, and I think I'm only playing one small little part in that journey, but I am hopeful that more and more people are understanding the importance of acknowledging those promises made so long ago. Thank you also to Grandmother Chevrier for your prayer and for reminding us of the power of prayer, of giving thanks in whatever way that you conceptualize that. You know, when I think about prayer, I was partially raised in the Catholic Church, partially, and so prayer and faith actually has been something I've rejected most of my life because of that experience. And yet, as I've grown older, what I've realized is that you can reject religion and accept spirituality. And so your message really reminds me of the importance of that we are all spiritual beings, and that the way that we connect to the world, to the land, to each other, to the unknown, is partly through prayer. And so thank you very much for that reminder. It's very personal to me. Thank you. I see so many friends here, Chief Nasaluk, Nathan Charlie, Hashukamas, Richard, Angie from Ahousaht. Thank you so much for, well, we really connected on Zoom, weirdly. How can you connect on Zoom? But I met the chiefs last winter? Last winter. And I instantly knew we had to have them here speaking. So I'm really thrilled that you're here and you've made the journey from far, far away, boats, planes, cars to get here, to share the work that you're doing to heal from so many of the traumas that colonization has represented. I know Megan Eder is here, I know Opal McInnes is here, and Annie Nuluki, and Laurie Russell, and a whole bunch of other people, including Dr. Carol Hopkins. So you're gonna have a fantastic 2 days. I'm sorry for those that I haven't mentioned, but if I spent my whole time listing out the names, then that's all that I would be able to say. I'm just really excited. And you know, it's not often I talk about being proud. It's sort of beaten out of me as a kid to not talk about being proud. But I am proud about this National Summit because this is the second annual. And guys, this was kind of like my idea, and it's so cool to see it come to life. And the reason I'm saying that, thank you. And I never like doing that, but I walked in and I felt like, wow, we built something, and it's got life because it's the second annual. And the reason it came to me that I wanted to do this is two things. One, that I often had been at conferences in my previous work in drug policy and housing and homelessness where Westerners could come together to talk about what was working and what wasn't working and share great ideas. But I've been a minister of the Crown now for 8 years, and for the first 6 years, all I saw in the space of bringing Indigenous people together was grief work. People would come together to talk about very important things, trauma and missing and murdered Indigenous women and all kinds of things. But when it came time to actually supporting Indigenous people to gather to talk about strength, there was an absence. And I thought to myself, that's intentional. That's an intentional action of colonial behavior, that when you can separate and divide people and only bring them together to talk about pain, but never have enough money to bring them together to talk about strength, that's a colonial tool too. That's a way of actually undermining and silencing people. It's a way of diminishing the strength of Indigenous people. And so I wanted to have a small part in changing that. And so the root of this National Summit is really a reflection of the need for Indigenous people to not just gather to talk about collective trauma, but also to gather to talk about collective strengths and approaches. And so I hope that no matter what happens in whatever election, that this approach is something that takes root and grows. And so thank you everyone for taking time out of your work. And I know it's really important work to be here. I also thought about how Western approaches to healing, mental health, and substance use at least in my experience in my family, and certainly with people I love, have not been that successful. And I have had such privilege over my lifetime, and certainly over this job, to participate in other healing practices that are extremely impactful. When I was a young woman, I was invited to participate in a sweat at Fort William First Nation. It was something that I'll never forget, and it was one of the most emotional experiences of my life. And it was at a time where I was really struggling, and Indigenous people welcomed me into a healing practice that was centuries old. This summer, just springtime, I was in Tecumloops, and the two facilitators asked me if I would like to participate in a brushing. I had no idea what I was getting into. I spent an hour in that room, and I told those individuals things that I had never expressed to anyone else in a really safe, supported way, things that I had been afraid to say out loud. I've always enjoyed smudging. Whenever there's a smudge, I take advantage of being able to cleanse myself and to center and ground myself. It's something that I've come to love and appreciate so greatly. And of course, I've attended hundreds of powwows and seen the healing nature of collective singing and dancing and praying together and celebrating together. And so when I think about Western treatment, treatment that I have participated in, that loved ones of mine have participated in, I think about the lack of that ceremony in those treatments. And I also think about the focus of those treatments on what's wrong with you, as opposed to what's happened to you. And so this approach, this Western approach, is not only failing Indigenous peoples because of many times the lack of focus on the history of oppression, the history of colonization, the ongoing experience of colonization, the disruption of families, the disruption of culture. But in fact, it's not working for Western people either because of its very specific focus on really what I think of a Western ideology of medicine. You know, one of the best classes I ever took in university was the anthropology of medicine, and it was such a mind-opening experience for me because it taught me that culture and language actually determines how you view your own health and how you view healing. And in Western ideology, it's very much a mechanical kind of view. You know, you have heart disease. You take it's a part in your body, like a car, and you can try to fix that part, and you can take medicine to make that part work better. But we don't talk about the connection of your heart to your soul. We don't talk about the connection of how your body is breaking down, related to how your mind or your spirit is suffering. And that is, unfortunately, a model that is perpetuated through, I would say, most Western medicine. And it isn't helpful when we're talking about healing our hearts and our minds and our spirits. Years ago, I ran a homeless shelter, and oftentimes I was asked by a variety of different politicians, can't believe I became one, but anyways, a variety of different politicians about why people couldn't just stop drinking, why people couldn't just stop using substances, and maybe that would be the solution to housing and homelessness. That's still out there, by the way. You'll still hear those kinds of ideologies perpetuated over and over and over, that if people could just stop drinking, then everything would be fixed. But I used to try to turn that around and say that I saw the substance use and mental health issues as a normal and reasonable response to the experience of absolute homelessness and placelessness. I used to say, in fact, to those legislators, I'm not sure I would want to sleep on a cement bed or be spit on or kicked or excluded from public washrooms in places like Tim Hortons without being completely wasted. I don't know if I could experience that kind of humiliation stone cold sober. And it's unreasonable and unkind to expect people to go through those experiences of absolute placelessness in a way that most of us couldn't cope with. And so what you're doing in the work that you're doing is you're actually connecting people. You're connecting people to themselves, to their families, to their cultures, to humanity. And you're telling people over and over and over, you have value, you have worth, I see you. The most powerful words that I learned to say in that shelter in a variety of different ways was, I see you. I hear you. Tell me more about your story. Tell me more about what happened to you. And is that most of you know is actually the healing power. None of us have special magic in this room. None of us are able to take a person who is really wounded and make them better in a week. But what you all do is you offer a vision of a different path. And you connect people to themselves, to their culture, to their language, and to the land. People are struggling all around the world. In North America in particular, we are seeing, exploding rates of people dying from overdoses. And what that says to me is that it's time for Western treatment providers and Western policymakers and Western politicians to learn and listen from Indigenous policymakers, treatment providers, and healers. Because what's happening in North America, I personally think, is a reflection of the illness that we're all feeling, being driven by all kinds of things. Probably shouldn't say this, but capitalism being one of them. We all want to grow our economy. Being driven by the disconnection, being driven by increasing pressure on the land, on the water, on the air, on the animals. I watched and helped support the evacuation of many Indigenous communities this summer as forest fires devastated parts of our land in amounts that we've never seen before. And it's easy, I think, for people who are not in the middle of that devastation to not understand the huge impact on people's mental health, not just of the relocation that often is triggering, because people have been relocated many times, but also of the damage to the land that they love, of the loss of life, of animal brothers and sisters, and ways of being, of going back to territory that's burnt out and unlivable, of the grief and loss of being able to connect to the land that you've known since time immemorial. Those kinds of things are real trauma. And I think that the world is facing the kinds of challenges that we've never seen before. So we need to pull together. We need to, I think, as a country, as nations, really embrace the notion that we are each other's people. And that when we are each other's people, we can actually heal and stand strong together. I'm really excited that I get to stay here today and participate, listen to speeches and presentations. I won't be able to go to all of them, but I'll be here for the majority of the day. And I really hope that if you see me in the hallway, you come up and talk to me and share your thoughts with me. I do believe that under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, we've taken massive steps towards self-determination, towards equity, towards truth, but I can also tell you it's not over. And I can also tell you that returning to the war on drugs is really a return to the war on people. So when you hear politicians from other parties talk about a law and order approach to suffering, I need you to stand up and say, no, we won't go back. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. I will not go through the list of all the great things that are happening in the country, but I will tell you that I am so immensely honored to be part of this. Thank you very much. Miigwech.